concluded that that was a very righteous use of force, completely justified. Then in 2020, he was involved in another officer-involved shooting, where the decedent in that case is a guy named Michael Ramos. And the district attorney, by then, José Garza, come into office. Chris got indicted for the Ramos officer-involved shooting.
Welcome back, viewers, watchers, listeners. I'm your host, Tyler Elwood. Once again, the man, the myth, the legend, has joined us in the Blue Grip podcast after the holiday season.
And more, I need to come in here more often.
You do, man. We produce. No, you are the El Jefe of Tmpa right now. And so, you're the big boss. And so I'm glad I always have you in.
Okay, well, let's start doing this more often.
One day.
Hey, big surprise. Jeff Lawrence showed up today.
How was your holidays?
Well, you know how it is. I come back to work, get some rest.
Yeah, I understand. We had some family come in. Thankfully, wasn't a whole lot, but it was a good time. The kids, I'm glad that they're back in school. Today's the official day of back to school, and so now some normalcy kind of can take place around the old Owen household. So
Yeah,
probably much like the Lawrence household.
I don't think the word normalcy in the Lawrence household ever.
No, well, okay,
met one of those.
True. Well, for those out there that have not watched our previous episode, there's an attorney here in Austin that has done some pretty amazing work. And since I moved, we have, I don't want to say formed a positive relationship. We formed a relationship with a certain district attorney in Travis County, being José Garza. And then you viewers and watchers out there are well aware of the complexities and challenges that our friends over at Austin Police and Travis County Sheriff's Office and those that work inside Austin have to deal with. And it's really strengthened our relationship with an attorney called Doug O'Connell. And so, he's going to come back on the podcast and talk about a pretty significant case that you represented with an APD member. And thankfully, he had you in your corner and we're able to get some success out of that. So welcome back, first of all.
Good to be back.
How was your holiday season?
It was very nice.
Quiet.
Well, towards the end, it got real busy.
Well, yeah, that's right. That's right. I've been seeing you on the news quite, here lately. It's like every time we turn on, you're front and center, as you should be. Certainly proud of all the work you did for that case, and we're going to dive off into that today. So, but
Doug, you've been on the podcast before.
I have.
Months ago.
My longtime trial partner, Ken Irvin, and I were here.
Yep.
Ken and I tried a great number of law enforcement cases together, and unfortunately, we lost Ken back in August.
Yeah, I'm very sorry to hear that. Was that the Ambler case you were working on at the time when that podcast took place? Or was that also about Taylor?
I can't remember. We were leading up into the Taylor case.
Yeah.
But I want to say
the second Taylor case.
It was yes. Yeah. It was the protests.
The Daniel Perry case. We had just gotten the pardon from Governor Abbott.
Yep.
And I think that's where we came.
Okay.
And the other Wilco case, I think you brought in as co-counsel.
And by the way, I don't mean to. We want to come back and talk about Ken.
Yes.
Later on, but first of all, I want to make sure the audience knows who Doug is. He's been here before. Is there any of his background that we need to share? What
I would just suggest, if you haven't watched the first podcast, we could certainly brush on his education experience just briefly, and then we can kind of dive off. Because the Christopher Taylor case is pretty complex and pretty awesome when you kind of dive up into it.
Right, and we can spend days talking about it.
Yeah.
But we've got a hard stop. We have to worry about.
Doug, we'll just go ahead and dive off into give the viewer and listener kind of a dive, or a really quick overview of your background.
So I've been an attorney for 31 years at this point. I started out as a misdemeanor prosecutor in the Travis County Attorney's Office, and then I went to the DA's office, Travis County DA's office, and that was back when prosecutors weren't there. Back when we thought of ourselves as partners with law enforcement, and we were in the business of enforcing the laws and holding criminals accountable. And that was a great experience. And then I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, where I was a federal prosecutor for a number of years. And then went ultimately into private practice.
Yeah.
And I have a small law firm here headquartered in Austin, O'Connell West. We have offices down in San Antonio. We have an office in Taylor, working on an office in Killeen. We represent law enforcement officers, but also regular citizens.
Yeah.
And we also represent a lot of military people because most of the attorneys I work with are military veterans. A couple guys are still in the Army Reserve.
Including yourself, a military vet.
I am. I retired in 2017 from the Texas National Guard. I ended up a colonel when it was all said and done. And so a lot of the folks that find their way to us are military veterans or their family members.
Yeah, and it's no surprise that you living in Austin and working here in Austin and your reputation, because it speaks for itself. You have formed a relationship, very close-knit relationship with the Austin Police Department. And correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm misspeaking, I think that APD officers really, when they get into a bind and they feel like they're being targeted or prosecuted, I mean, with the whole riot situation of the protest, but 21 of them got indicted. They leaned on you for a lot of representation, and some of the heavier cases that you've taken on have been more of the high-profile cases. That's an accurate statement?
Almost all of the cases.
Yes. Yeah. You're not talking. I mean, and not that you don't like dealing with, and I don't want to call an IA a petty. That you don't typically deal with an IA case or an officer appealing at some kind of small suspension. Typically, cases you're involved in are pretty much the high-profile charges that are publicly brought against the officers.
That's accurate. The APA has some very, very high-quality in-house attorneys, and they handle the internal affairs portion.
Right.
Sometimes if we feel like I need to go see how that officer does answering questions to predict or get insight into how they might do at trial, then I will take over and handle the IA portion. But generally, no.
Well, so for those that don't know or don't live in the Austin area, of course, this made national news when this occurred. You were assigned, or you took over a case in 2019, the Taylor case?
Okay, let's make sure we go to the background here.
Yeah.
Chris Taylor was indicted and tried on a different case altogether. I'm trying to make sure I get my facts straight, and was acquitted on that case. And then the DA went back and reopened this 2019 case that he'd already been cleared on and took it to a grand jury and indicted him on this one.
So that's sort of accurate.
Okay.
In 2019, Chris Taylor and another officer named Carl Crecia got involved in an officer-involved shooting and at a high-rise condominium downtown Austin, and we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Everybody in the department and the district attorney's office, I believe, concluded that that was a very righteous use of force, completely justified. Then in 2020, he was involved in another officer-involved shooting, where the decedent in that case is a guy named Michael Ramos. And the district attorney, by then, José Garza, had come into office. And Chris got indicted for the Ramos officer-involved shooting.
Which I think it's important for those that aren't aware or aren't around the Austin area. That made somewhat Texas statewide national news, but it was the premier news story. And that's, I think, if you correct me if I'm wrong, Garza ran on the campaign that he was going to bring, the law enforcement justice, and Ramos was significantly in part of his campaign.
That he was going to prosecute cops. He ran on the platform of prosecuting cops.
And specifically Chris Taylor.
Yeah, right. On the Ramos case.
On the Ramos case, and then the Wilco deputies on the Ambler case.
Right.
So
and I don't want to sell that point short. José Garza targeted Chris Taylor from the beginning. Before he even got elected.
Before he ever took office.
Right.
He had concluded, before he'd ever seen a case file, he had concluded that somehow Christopher Taylor was wrong.
And of course, the Ramos case would have been the one to go with first because it had all the publicity. It was commonly linked to the George Floyd case.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And so Ken Irvin and I, my longtime trial partner, represented Chris Taylor in the Ramos case. And I think it all runs together at this point. I'm sorry, but I want to say we set out to try that case 3 times. The first time, we were not able to seat a jury. The second time, we were not able to seat a jury. And the third time, it resulted in a hung jury mistrial because the jury hung. In the meantime, while all that was going on, the district attorney indicted Chris Taylor and Carl Cretia on the 2019 older officer-involved shooting. And then ultimately we tried that case.
Okay. And Chris was convicted.
He was.
And then last week, and the reason we called you to be here today is the Court of Appeals overturned that conviction and went even further and declared and issued an acquittal.
Yes.
On the case, which is pretty rare, right?
It's so rare that I can't even articulate. It simply never happens. Getting a criminal case reversed on appeal is very rare. Getting the Court of Appeals to issue an acquittal is unheard of.
So talk about that real quick, because I mean, admittedly, if I was 24 years old on patrol, some of these cops that we're working right now, or even our law enforcement supporters, may not understand the magnitude and significance behind that. So give kind of a definition of really how significant that is for that Court of Criminal Appeals to do such a thing.
So first, not Court of Criminal Appeals, Court of
Appeals, sorry.
Specifically the 7th Court of Appeals out in West Texas. And that's an interesting and important thing to note, because normally a case out of Austin would go to the 3rd Court of Appeals. It was sent out to the 7th Court of Appeals because of what they call docket leveling, spreading the workload out for the appellate judges. And so it goes out to this West Texas court, which probably worked in our favor, frankly. And I should say, and this is very important, I want people to know, I didn't handle the appeal. An appellate lawyer named Rick Wetzel handled the appeal. Ken and I went out and recruited Rick and said, we want you to take this case. Rick is one of the finest appellate lawyers around. He wrote the brief, he argued at oral arguments, and so, the credit for this astounding victory goes to Rick.
Okay. Now, and I want to talk about the impact this has had on Chris Taylor, and then if you don't feel comfortable talking about, any of this, we understand, but, Chris has been in and out of the courtroom now for 6 years, going on 7 years, over what have ultimately been determined to be justified shootings. And even the Austin Police Department stood behind him right up until the moment he was convicted. And once he was what was he convicted of, by the way?
He was convicted of deadly conduct. So
deadly conduct.
Chris and Carl Cretia were indicted for murder and deadly conduct. They waived the murder count in the indictment and proceeded on deadly conduct.
Okay. And so he was now been acquitted. But once he was convicted, the Austin Police Department then fired him.
What
we understand, they really didn't have any choice at that point. He's a convicted criminal there. But now that he's been acquitted, I don't know whether or not Austin can offer him his job back. I guess he would have to go through the hiring process yet. He may not want to work in Travis County. He may not want to work in law enforcement again, for that matter. I'm just curious to know, because these cases have ripple effects, and we know it affected him. We know it's affected the Austin Police Department. His family has to be just traumatized by all of this.
Yeah, they've been through so much, and I'm in awe of Chris because he is a pretty stoic guy, and he has rolled with the punches this whole time. And I think it's sad, but true, that while he's very happy with this outcome, he's kind of shell-shocked and waiting for the next shoe to drop. What's next?
Yeah.
What am I going to have to deal with next?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Wow.
And I think it's important to kind of point this out too. I think that back to your point about the Ramos and the timing of everything and the George Floyd, I think admittedly, we at Tmpa certainly, the law enforcement during that time, we kind of got hit in the mouth. We didn't know, we knew we needed to respond, and we knew that something needed to be done, but we didn't prepare for war at that point, knowing of understanding really how complex and challenging the whole George Floyd aspect was going to be across the nation.
People don't remember, and some people didn't even realize at the time, the defund the police movement was going on as a result of all this too. And Austin Police Department had their budget cut by fully 1/3. While that was going on. And so it's not just the Chris Taylor case or cases that have negatively impacted Austin PD. It was a whole bunch of other stuff. But certainly this is hurting their recruiting retention efforts.
Right.
Oh yes, and of course I'm a lawyer, not an officer, but I can't help but to think of, if you're a high quality, talented young person who wants a career in law enforcement, do you go to Austin, or do you go to Fort Worth, or do you go to, Nacogdoches? Where do you go? But you probably don't come to Austin.
Well, and in all honesty, another reason why we wanted to have this conversation today is because the trial of Adrian Gonzalez from Uvalde ISD started yesterday down in Corpus Christi. They've seen it in jury, so the trial is starting in earnest today. But it strikes me that the irony of these two cases strikes me because Chris Taylor was convicted because in the split second he had to make a decision, he took the shot.
He ran toward danger.
He ran toward danger and he took the shot. Adrian Gonzalez has been indicted on 19 counts of endangering a child because he ran toward danger and in that split second did not shoot an 18-year-old kid in the back. What message are we sending to law enforcement or people who might be thinking about law enforcement as a career, where no matter what you do, you're going to be dragged in front of a jury and treated like a criminal?
Yeah.
Now, one thing I'm happy about in that case is they were able to get a change of venue. Okay, so it's not being held in Uvalde, it's down in Corpus. We tried on the Ramos case to get a change of venue, and we've been denied at every turn. But hopefully that case being moved to Corpus will help us in the future if we need a change of venue.
Well, maybe. I understand your point. Help us legally defend these officers who shouldn't be on trial at all.
Right.
But our point is the prosecuting of these officers is causing so much of an effect. Like I say, it's hurting the profession, it's hurting the agencies, it's hurting these individuals. By the way, when you talk to Chris, when he's ready, when he feels like we'd love to talk to him about his future, please give him my number to let's come by and talk to us. But what about what kind of impact does it have on you as the attorney?
I don't do a good job of stopping and thinking about that sort of thing. We got this incredible outcome for Chris. But honestly, what I'm focused on is in June of this year, we're going to try the first case from the May 2020 riots here in Austin.
Yep.
And we're going to be representing Officer Chance Bretches, who fired a beanbag with a lethal shotgun, and a rioter was injured. And so, that's on the horizon. And my team is preparing for that case, right now.
But
by the way, I'm so glad you used the term rioter. I'm so sick of the mostly peaceful protest. Yeah. The other day I was thinking, well, it was a mostly peaceful bombing down in Venezuela.
Right. But this, in my opinion, this acquittal, this whole criminal justice episode that took place with Taylor, full circle, I think it sends a message to people in Austin and Travis County, and really across the state. We're seeing the positivity of a positive Harris County District Attorney's Office with Kim Oggs vacating, and now have a new DA in there that's, even though that they're a part of that political party, they're still balanced in the sense of sensible decisions that one can kind of understand to a certain extent. To me, it sends a message to Garza and those far left in Travis County that the pendulum might be swinging back, right? I think that Austinites are looking at the aspect that, crime rates through the roof when you defund the police. When you target cops on political beliefs and weaponize the Texas Penal Code, it's not good for everybody, right? It's not just good for law. It's not good for anybody within Travis County. And so hopefully with this trial coming up in the summertime, maybe it'll kind of, I guess,
I don't see Garza ever flipping, changing his position on all this. Maybe the voters at some point finally get tired of this nonsense, but I was thinking about this in relation to the Uvalde case. Why are you indicting this cop? And Chief Arredondo's trial is set for later on, but the superintendent hasn't been indicted.
All right.
Is the superintendent not just as culpable? Because there were multiple reports about the doors not locking, about the fence not being high. There was all kinds of stuff. They weren't in compliance with state regulations.
Well, I think
about school safety.
the larger question and answer is we all know why.
How about the teachers who left the doors open?
Right. We all know why they're on trial. When that many children are
Right. We got to hold somebody accountable.
Well, not even that. They have to have a scapegoat. You have to hold somebody in front of the public and say, this is the villain.
Okay. I guess I don't understand how it is that we don't consider the impact on the victims here. And I understand we've got 19 dead children, 2 dead adults, but we got all those families. And by indicting this officer and taking him to trial, I think you give them some sort of false hope that they're going to get a closure here. And if he's convicted, they're not going to be any less tortured.
I agree.
By what happened. If he's acquitted, they're going to be even more tortured.
Yeah.
I don't understand why the trial, because I'm convinced even if they get a conviction, it's overturned on appeal somehow.
Well, to the question you asked just a moment ago, I do think the attitudes are shifting.
Yeah.
But I agree with Kevin. Jose Garza is never going to change. Yeah. And part of the reason behind that is he cannot. And here's what I mean. You guys may be familiar with this organization called the RAND Collective.
Yep.
And that's an organization funded by George Soros that promises and delivers campaign funding and probably other funding to progressive prosecutors. In exchange, those prosecutors take policy direction from the RAND collectives. Mm-hmm. And I think they are really the people calling the shots in terms of law enforcement cases.
Yeah.
And there's a wonderful, very detailed, very well-researched report from the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Foundation about the RAND collective, and you can get it online, and I'd encourage everybody to read that.
Yeah. And that's what's unfortunate is that the major cities within Texas have all been Soros funded. I mean, I can't think of one. You got San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, not so much, but we're seeing some Soros type characteristics coming from that district attorney because of some, federal promises on the other side of it. And then Houston, which we're seeing a little bit of change in Houston, but it's just unfortunate that these major cities are suffering from that.
I'm hearing that Sean Tier has actually now had a couple of missteps as well down in Harris County, but we'll see.
We'll see.
So what kind of support network do you have?
Me personally?
Yeah. So when you have to deal with, I guess you're a human being. It's got to have an impact on you.
Well, I like to think I have a great support network. I have a lot of close friends, including military buddies. Tomorrow night I'll be with some other guys I served with. We get together once a month. I of course, have a wonderful wife and family. I work with a very supportive team in my office, and then I have relationships with counselors and therapists because oftentimes, especially in our military cases, we need to hook up a client with a provider, and we have good relationships so that if they don't take this type of insurance, maybe they take this type of insurance, and we have a network of folks who work with us if need be.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm certain your military training, your military background is also something very helpful for you that you can draw upon. We have more and more military veterans that are getting into law. I've gotten into law enforcement over the last 10 years, maybe even longer than that. And I think that helps. But it also, I think, complicates matters. Remember, after George Floyd, the defund movement, there was a big cry and whatever the terminology is, that cops should not be warriors. We should not militarize our police. They should be guardians and not warriors. And then Uvalde happened, and they're screaming, "Where were the warriors?"
Yeah.
And people just don't realize that cops have to be capable of being both. And they have to be capable of flipping a switch in a split second, going from one to the other. And I guess you better than anybody understands how difficult that is.
I think, so in the military, I wasn't a lawyer. I was never a lawyer for the military.
Oh, you weren't JAG, huh?
No,
Oh.
no. So I was a special forces officer, Green Beret. And
So you really understand it better than most.
well, but I got to tell you, I'm always very careful when I'm talking to a new police officer client to make sure they understand. I've never been a cop, and I think it's important for me to state that up front. I have a lot of insight at this point, and maybe if your shot group is high and to the right, I can tell you about how we get it back on target. But I think it's important for me and anybody else that does what I do to understand your limitations, because having never been an officer, I don't think I'm qualified to be critical of split-second decisions where life and death is on the line.
And amazingly, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that repeatedly.
Yeah.
Well, I look, knowing, I've got several friends of mine that are to that tier in the military service, and I understand that you were a Green Beret. It kind of goes hand in hand of why I think you remain committed to the mission, and why you remain committed to the mission of serving those who serve Texas and within. But what's interesting is that, just like Kevin said, you may not have been a cop, and I think law enforcement to a certain degree is the toughest job in the world, because compared to a military service, you have to add compassion and you have to have grace within the enforcement actions. In the military, you don't necessarily need those qualities within those job performances, and you have to have those to be a cop. And so then you have the complexities of having progressive DAs and those that weaponize the Texas Penal Code in order to fulfill their political agenda. And it's just a complex situation. But
And I've said this repeatedly over the last, couple of decades. Back when I was a cop, and I started way back, but we were policing less than 10% of the population. There was a 90+% of the population that we dealt with them on traffic stops and so on and so forth, but we were policing that small group of folks who just didn't believe the rules applied to them. And now these cops out there today, and I couldn't do the job anymore because we're not policing that group anymore. Now we're policing an entire population that just doesn't think we should have rules at all. Not that the rules don't apply to them, but they just don't believe we ought to have rules. And so we're asking cops to do the impossible and then complaining when we get really remarkably great results out of them.
Yeah.
It's insane what they're at. And speaking of crazy stuff, you see, I watched a really complex video. It's from Mississippi State Trooper. There's an accident on the interstate. This is one of those crazy ass stories this guy wants to believe. And it was a traffic accident where wild monkeys had gotten out of the freeway. And so and now they're being criticized by PETA in Mississippi. They were wild monkeys inside this truck, and I think 21 had gotten out. Okay, and the trooper is given the manifest that these monkeys are infected with COVID, herpes, other dangerous diseases. And so this trooper's mindset's like, one of these monkeys, I mean, I've seen, what is it, breakout? Is that what it's called?
Outbreak,
yeah. And so I'm thinking, Jesus Christ. And so you can tell there's a switch, because he's kind of laughing about it. He's like, yeah, I heard monkeys were on the interstate, and I just had to come over here and kind of check this out. And then you can tell a switch flipped. Like, oh shit, this is way more dangerous than when
all of a sudden it's monkeys with STDs.
Yeah, exactly. They're shutting down the interstate. They're smoke checking monkeys, but now I come to find out these monkeys were going to be infected. They weren't infected yet, so now they're being criticized or ridiculed for taking these monkeys out. But to your point is that it's like, take the shot or not take the shot. Either way,
I think when you're dealing with monkeys, you always take the shot.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when you're informed that they're all infected with STDs.
So you all heard that coming from your lawyer.
Yeah. But anyway, it's a complex situation. Man, we can't thank you enough for coming on. If you want to dive into your counterpart, your partner that we lost in August, and talk about kind of what resources are out there, we certainly do that at this point.
Yeah, so it's not a secret within the Austin law enforcement community that Ken took his own life.
Okay.
And all of us that work closely with him are devastated. And it's not something that passes quickly. And to compound things, so we were trial partners. We maintained our own separate practices. And so it made sense for me to be the person to close down his law firm. And so there's part of my grieving process has been to be extremely pissed off at him because of the ass pain involved in shutting down his law practice. And I don't think we're ever going to know or understand the why behind this. And I come to accept that. One of the things that I did to make sure I was processing everything appropriately was to go get counseling, right? Because I didn't know if I needed it or not, but I know from the military that our default decision making is I'm tough, I'm mentally tough, I'm capable. I don't need counseling. I don't need my head shrunk. And I think that is 100% the wrong answer. Yeah. Counseling never hurt anybody. And so I went to see a psychologist named Tanya Glenn, who's here in Austin.
Great.
And you've heard of her?
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
Great friends at Tmpa. So.
She works with all kinds of first responders. And the other thing I did was to make sure my team knew that I was doing this. And I felt like I owed it to myself and my family first. I owed it to my clients. But I also owed it to my team of attorneys and support staff I lead to make sure this didn't get clogged in my head and somehow I end up with mental health issues as a result of what had happened. And so, I put it on my calendar, Doug out of the office, not just out of the office, but Doug counseling, right? And when people would try to schedule something with me and it conflicted with the counseling, I'd say, can't, I'm going to counseling. Just so everybody understood that.
There's nothing to be ashamed of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then.
It gets even more complicated for cops, though. And I'll go back to my experience. But with regard to Ken, we have no way of knowing this. You would hate to think that any of these cases that he worked on somehow contributed to that.
But, yeah.
Ultimately.
Hey.
Being an attorney, a trial attorney, is extremely stressful, right? Because if you mess something up, and we live through this, right? If you mess something up, your client goes to prison, right? And so that is extremely stressful, as is being a law enforcement officer. I will say, though, however, in Ken's case, he handled the stress better than anybody else I've known, which is what made him such a great trial partner. He was unflappable in the courtroom, and I will miss working with him dearly.
Yeah, well, certainly law enforcement as a whole, lost an advocate, lost a great, support system there. Back to your point about counseling never hurt anybody. Unfortunately, historically in law enforcement, if officers have come forward and said, I need counseling, too many of them have gotten fired because of it. Because, there's still a large percentage of cops in Texas that work in completely and totally at-will employment environments. And sheriffs and chiefs just wouldn't stand behind them. Now, there's been a shift. There's been a kind of a new push toward, and even some statutes have been passed to encourage officers to come forward. But there's still agencies out there where they can't. It's just impossible. So they suffer in silence. And like you said, the big thing about counseling is not having somebody shrink your head. It's just having somebody you can talk to.
Right.
That's not going to run tell your department about it, not going to run tell somebody else about it. And that's huge for cops.
Yeah. Well, and I think that cops, majority, let's just say, just hypothetically speaking from my perspective, me being a man married to a woman, and I couldn't tell my wife about situations that I was dealing with. I was supposed to be, viewed as the big bad husband and that, could handle all the stress. And, I had certainly my struggles, and it took a lot for me to, share those dark, deep secrets with her, to saying, hey, I'm not okay. And thankfully, there were some opportunities that, this organization gave me in order to transplant myself to Central Texas. But to your point, it's okay to talk about it. It's okay that you're not okay, right? And I think,
or even if who are we to self-diagnose?
Yeah,
right? So
right.
We don't know if we're okay or not.
That's
right.
right.
Times.
Right.
So better to be proactive to make sure you don't have a problem.
right. And to your point about him not you couldn't recognize the stress. He looked like it didn't affect him at all. He was, fearless in the courtroom, and he carried himself well. Everybody carries it differently.
And for officers out there that are listening that might be suffering in silence, the job isn't worth it. Even if you're running the risk of losing that job, I'm sorry, take care of yourself first. And we'll deal with the job situation afterwards. And like I said, there are now some protections, some statutory protections in place, but find somebody you can talk to, please. It's critical.
Yep. I think that's a good point to end on today. I think that right now, if you're struggling, do not hesitate to, you can reach out to us at Tmpa and we can get you in contact with some counseling. 1-800-COP line certainly is a good advocate and a good resource that you can use. But don't suffer alone and don't remain silent. I think it's important for you and your family and your colleagues. And again, to those colleagues out there that recognize that your partners are struggling, reach out. A simple phone call can help save a life. And
Before we sign off, by the way, you said something earlier. By the way, Doug and I have never met before today. I think we've talked on the phone maybe a time or two, email back and forth. We've never met face to face until today. I was surprised to hear you say you've got how many lawyers in your law firm?
Counting me 9.
Okay. And you've got offices in Austin, San Antonio,
New Braunfels, Taylor. We're working on an office in Clayton.
and Lockhart. Did I hear you say you got a lawyer down in Lockhart?
Lives there.
Okay, all right.
We don't have an office.
That's a big chunk of Central and South Texas. So for Tmpa members, they're available if you need a lawyer.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
We'll hook you up.
I can't thank you enough for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Kevin, anything else you want to know?
Appreciate it, but I got to go to executive staff meetings.
Hey, welcome to the 2026 year. I hope you and your family had a wonderful holiday season. Hope your 2026 year is off to a great start. That's it from us at Tmpa.
Remember to put 26 on your office.
2026.
The tickets and everything.
Yeah, and by the way,
I used to hate
this
that.
is a good time for you to check with us. Check with us. Make sure that your mailing addresses, your email addresses, and all of your contact information is up to date. That way we can have records of those here at Tmpa. But from all of us here, I hope you guys have a great new year. Thank you for listening. God bless you. And as always, may God bless Texas.